Have you ever reached the end of a busy day, looked back, and wondered where your time actually went? And not because you were being lazy this day, but the opposite. You did everything you were supposed to do. You answered the emails, you solved the problems, you returned the phone calls, you helped people, you handled unexpected situations. You were moving from the moment the day began. Yet, the one thing that you promised yourself that you would accomplish never happened. Most of us have experienced that feeling. And when we do, we usually blame ourselves. We say things like, I need more discipline, I need better time management, or I just need to work harder. But I don't think that's the real problem. I think many of us confuse being busy with moving in the right direction. And those aren't the same thing. Imagine you're hiking through some unfamiliar mountains. The weather changes constantly. The wind shifts. Rain begins to fall. Clouds roll in and hide the horizon. None of those things tell you where to go. It's simply the conditions that you're traveling through. What keeps you moving toward your destination isn't the weather. It's your compass. The compass doesn't panic when the weather changes. It doesn't point toward whatever is loudest or closest. It quietly keeps pointing in the same direction. And life works much the same way. Every day brings changes and changing conditions. Unexpected emails, urgent requests, last-minute problems, new opportunities, someone else's priorities. Those are the weather. And if you don't decide where you're going before the day begins, the changing weather will decide for you. That's why this lesson isn't really about productivity. It's about direction. Because a meaningful life isn't built by doing more things. It's built by consistently returning to what deserves the best of you. One of the biggest misconceptions about successful people is that they simply have fewer demands on their time. They don't. In fact, they often have more. They have more opportunities, more responsibilities, more decisions, more people asking for their attention. The difference isn't the number of demands they face. The difference is that they decided what mattered before those demands arrived. That's an important distinction. Most people wake up without a compass. So the first email becomes a priority. The first notification becomes a priority. The loudest voice becomes a priority. The newest problem becomes a priority. By the end of the day, they've been incredibly productive, at least at accomplishing everyone else's agenda. Imagine replacing your compass with a weather vane. A weather vane has no direction of its own, just kind of spins with the weather. Simply turns toward whichever way the wind happens to blow. If the wind changes, it changes. If the storm moves, it moves. Many people live exactly that way. Every interruption changes their focus. Every request changes their plans. Every opinion changes their thinking. They are constantly adjusting, rarely advancing. Now, compare that with a compass. The wind can change, the temperature can change, the trail can disappear. The compass remains steady. Not because it ignores reality, but because it refuses to let reality redefine its destination. That's what priorities do. They don't remove interruptions. They prevent interruptions from becoming your direction. Here's something I've learned that has changed the way I think about life. You will never run out of things you could do. You will only run out of time to do what matters most. That's why priorities are rarely a choice between good and bad. They're usually a choice between good and best. And that's much harder. A worthwhile opportunity can still distract you from your day. A helpful conversation can still interrupt work that only you can do. A full calendar can still produce an empty life. Every yes carries an invisible no. When you say yes to one commitment, you're saying no to something else that could have received the same time. The question isn't whether you're making those decisions because you already are. The question is whether you're making them intentionally. And that's why priorities don't limit your freedom. They protect it. They remove the need to renegotiate your values every time something unexpected happens. The decision's already been made. When your priorities are clear, the day becomes quieter. Not because fewer demands exist, but because fewer demands have the power to change your direction. And that's the difference between living by pressure and living by purpose. There's another way to think about priorities that's become increasingly important to me. Most people treat priorities like items on a checklist, and I don't think they are. I think priorities are declarations. Every priority quietly says, this deserves a portion of my life. And that's a much heavier statement because attention isn't just focus. Attention is your life. Just distributed one moment at a time. Every conversation receives part of your life. Every meeting receives part of your life. Every distraction receives part of your life. Every meaningful relationship, every important project, every quiet moment of reflection receives something that you'll never get back. That's why deciding your priorities deserves far more thought than simply organizing your calendar. You're not scheduling tasks. You're actually allocating your life. And that changes the question entirely because instead of asking, how can I fit everything in? You begin asking, what is worthy of my life? And that's the question that priorities answer. Not what can I finish today, but what deserves the best of me? The culture around us constantly rewards movement, more productivity, more activity, more accomplishment. But movement without direction is just efficient wandering. You can work incredibly hard and still arrive somewhere you never intended to go. A compass doesn't make the journey easier. It makes the journey meaningful because it constantly reminds you of where you're trying to go. And the same is true of your priorities. Whether or when your priorities are clear, urgency loses much of its power. A new request doesn't automatically become your responsibility. An unexpected opportunity doesn't automatically deserve a yes. Someone else's pressure doesn't automatically become your purpose. You pause, you look at the compass, then you decide. And that's a very different way of living. The world says respond immediately. Your priorities quietly ask, does this move me toward the life I'm trying to build? I think that's a better question because every priority shapes identity. If you can consistently prioritize learning, you become wiser. If you consistently prioritize meaningful relationships, you'll build deeper trust. If you consistently prioritize your physical, mental, and spiritual health, you become more capable of serving the people that you care about. And none of those changes happen overnight. They compound quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize you're becoming the person your priorities have been training you to become all along. And that's why priorities aren't simply about getting more done. They're about becoming someone different, someone whose life is guided by purpose instead of pressure, someone who can walk through changing weather without ever losing true north. Because your compass doesn't eliminate the storm. It simply reminds you that the storm is not your destination. So how do you actually live this way? Starts before the day begins, not after the interruptions arrive. Before. Tomorrow morning, before you open your email, before you check your messages, before you let the world tell you what's important, take 5 quiet minutes. Ask yourself one question. What deserves the best of me today? Notice how different that feels from asking, what do I have to get done? Or what's most urgent? Urgency is loud. Priority is intentional. Urgency demands your attention. Priority deserves it. And once you've answered that question, choose 3 priorities, not 10, not a page full of tasks, 3. And why only 3? Because if everything is important, then nothing truly is. So those 3 priorities become your compass. And they don't guarantee a perfect day. They simply give you something to return to when the weather changes. And it will change. Someone will interrupt you. A new opportunity will appear. An unexpected problem will demand your attention. Life doesn't stop because you have a plan. Intentional living isn't about pretending those moments don't exist. It's about refusing to let them quietly replace what matters most. Whenever something unexpected appears, pause before saying yes. Ask yourself, does this deserve to replace one of today's priorities? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Real emergencies happen, people matter, responsibilities change, and a compass doesn't ignore reality. It just helps you navigate it. But most interruptions aren't emergencies. They're invitations. And one of the most freeing things you'll ever learn is this. Every invitation doesn't require your acceptance. And then throughout the day, I found another simple practice to be incredibly helpful. Every time you finish one task, don't immediately move to whatever is easiest or loudest or closest. Pause, look at the compass, and then ask yourself, what's the highest value thing that I can do next? And that one question prevents drift. Without it, we naturally move toward convenience. With it, we intentionally return to significance. Then, before the day ends, spend a few quiet moments reflecting. Don't measure success by how many boxes you checked. Measure it by something much more meaningful. Ask yourself, did my priorities receive the best of me today? And if the answer is yes, celebrate that, even if the day didn't unfold exactly as you planned. If the answer is no, don't criticize yourself. Become curious. What changed your direction? What repeatedly pulled your attention away? What deserves a stronger boundary tomorrow? That's today's daily focus. Before tomorrow begins, decide on the 3 things that deserve the best of you. Write them down. Keep them visible. Return to them whenever the weather changes. Because priorities don't remove distractions. They simply remind you where true north is. And every time you intentionally return to what matters most, you're becoming the kind of person who lives by purpose instead of pressure. Imagine looking back on this season of your life 5 years from now. What do you think you'll remember? Probably not every email you cleared or you answered. Not every notification that you handled or cleared. Not every item you checked off your list. You'll remember what received your heart, the conversation that changed the relationship, the work that reflected your purpose, the quiet moments that shaped your character, the decisions that quietly changed the direction of your life. Those are the things that deserve your attention. And that's why this lesson has never really been about productivity. It's about alignment, about making sure the way you spend your attention reflects the person you're trying to become. Think about what we built together. Our last several lessons. You learn to notice, then you learn to direct your attention, then you learn to protect it. Now you've learned something equally important. You must decide where it belongs. Because attention without priorities is still vulnerable to drift. You can protect your attention and still spend it on things that don't matter. And a compass solves that problem. It doesn't eliminate changing weather, it just simply refuses to confuse weather with the destination. The life will continue changing. Unexpected responsibilities will come. Opportunities will appear. Plans will need to adapt. That's all normal. The question isn't whether conditions will change. The question is whether your direction will. Because once you've decided what deserves your life, you no longer have to rediscover your purpose every morning. You simply return to it again and again and again. That's one of the quiet freedoms of intentional living. You stop allowing every demand to compete equally for your attention. You stop confusing movement with progress. You stop measuring success by activity alone. Instead, you begin measuring your days by something much more meaningful. Did what mattered most receive the best of me? If the answer is yes, you're already moving in the right direction, even if the journey is slower than you hoped, because meaningful lives are rarely built by dramatic moments. They're built by ordinary days with extraordinary clarity. Tomorrow morning, before the weather changes, look at the compass, decide where you're going, then keep returning to it, because every day will offer you countless directions. Only one of them leads towards a life you're trying to build. And every time you choose your priorities before your pressures, you're quietly choosing the person you're becoming. Because your priorities reveal what deserves your attention, and your attention reveals the direction of your life. Today's daily focus. Before tomorrow begins, identify the 3 priorities that deserve the best of you. Write them down before the day begins. Return to them whenever the weather changes. And here's a memorable principle. Your priorities decide your direction long before your calendar does.